well as the whole as well as the whole EEC. It's a pleasure. I enjoy having this conversation to help people understand how to communicate to investors in the best way, so that way they can secure an investment, which will of course further their business endeavor. So just as another reiterate, I am a deal strategist, a venture capital advisor to Daymond John of Shark Tank, among others. I'll also run in partnership with True Access Capital, a seed venture fund here in the state of Delaware that invests in early stage companies, high growth companies that are women led, minority led ventures. And so we invest probably about $5,000 to $50,000, depending on the size of the company. And they just have to be headquartered here in the state of Delaware. And these are non-dilutive investment structures. And what I mean, and I know most people who are familiar with True Access Capital, they're thinking the loans. This is not that. These are investments similar to the venture capital world, but we do not take equity. So these these investment structures help grow with the company versus a monthly fixed fee. So that's the reason why we created this side endeavor, the seed fund, to kind of help fuel more growth in companies. And of course, we have FundingFuel, which is a platform to allow folks to invest passively in franchise opportunities. So getting started, how to create a investor ready pitch deck. Now, I'm not sure of the makeup of my audience, meaning that normally I come from the background of venture, so a lot of times I'm speaking to high growth technology oriented companies, but I understand that may not always be the case. But there's others that may have other businesses that may not be venture backed related businesses, but still need to have the opportunity to talk to investors. And so this slide, I try to kind of generalize this slide the best I can. So some things may relate, some things may not. So just kind of take out what's relatable to your situation and replace with something else. So, but I believe the meat of this presentation is beneficial for everybody, regardless of the type of business you have, whether it's a restaurant to a technology startup company. All right. So let's get started. So investing in startup companies, small businesses, investing in general is risky. Okay. You can invest in a stock market and still lose all your money. All right. That's a reality. I've done it. I invested in a couple of companies and they went belly up, right? So it's a reality. So reason why I'm sharing this, because in my experience, a lot of times, entrepreneurs have the concept of their business is the best thing since sliced bread. And we're not saying that it is not, but we are saying that we've been down this road many of times. Many adventures have we thought that would have been like home runs, turned out to be nothing. All right. So you also got to respect the investors' risk appetite to understand that they also have understanding that there is a strong possibility that investing in this private company, they can possibly lose all their money. So as the entrepreneur, you got to also note too, you got to think about your investment as a real asset class, meaning that your business is not just your baby, but it's an asset to help that investor build wealth. And so it's just like the stock market, because think about it, they could invest in you or the stock market. Why are they taking money from the stock market to invest where they could invest in the stock market to invest in you? Generally speaking, is because investing in private companies can potentially have a higher yield of return. But as I noted, they are high. There's a higher level of risk. So your job as the entrepreneur, because I think even statistics show that how I think about 70 to 90% of new companies fail. All right. And for a lot of different reasons, not one more than the other, but a lot of different reasons. So with that being said, so there's two questions typically an investor is thinking in their head. before they move forward making an investment. You know, these are not things that they may always articulate to you, but they're thinking, you know, could I actually lose all my money in this person? Do I have confidence person could help me? Or do I have confidence in this person can help that will help multiply my money? Or is there a possibility? Well, there's always a possibility to lose money, but it's more of, is it closer to the side of losing the money, or is it closer side where I can actually, is a potential for me to make money? And then the other question is, you know, well, what's the possibility of the return I can get? And I'm gonna just use a general ROI term of just a multiple of their money, meaning that if I invest $100, I get 3 times my money back, which is $300. Okay, and so for venture capitalists, they may be looking at 10x. For maybe an angel investor, they may be looking at 3, 4, you know, X or something like that. Some people may be, and it all depends on the level of risk. I mean, the level of sophistication of that particular investor. You know, they might be looking at 2 times. So every internal investor has they obviously everybody wants to get 100 times X. That's, you know, any investor wants the best return possible. But any sophisticated level investor understands that there's going to be this range of a multiple. What do they really foresee that they can get? And so also another note too, there is probably going to be 2 levels of investors that you going to be, maybe 3, 2 levels of investors that you'll have to deal with. And actually, I'm going to get to that in 1 second. As an entrepreneur, again, going back to my point of that you got to think about your business as an asset class. And so your job is to increase the confidence of that investor. And you do that by helping reduce the risk. It does not take away the risk, but it helps reduce the risk. As an example, what I mean by helping reduce the risk, if you were an entrepreneur that built a company and sold it for X amount money, right? And then you're starting a new company in maybe even a similar industry, right? And you ask for more money. That's an example of reducing the risk, because now the investor sees that you have experience in building the company up and exiting that company for profit, and now you basically want to do the same thing. So that investor has more confidence. I'll give you as an example. I know a guy that invested in Jet.com, which was sold to Walmart some years ago for like, I think $3 billion, excuse me, not 3 million, $3 billion. And the interesting part is that was probably that entrepreneur. It was easy to raise money. The guy jokingly said this to me. He was like, "Look, when he comes to me, I just give him a blank check and say, hey, okay, how much and who do I make the check out to?" Reason why is because they invested him years prior in another endeavor, which exit for, I think that was like $500 million. So second go around, they're like, well, shoot, yeah, you know, who do I make the check out to, right? Versus, I'm just going to use an extreme example of, you know, someone who's just worked at Walmart, says I want to start a business, but is asking for like a ton of money. All right. They don't have any entrepreneur experience, no business experience, nothing, no industry experience, et cetera, et cetera. That's higher risk, which is a decrease in the confidence of the investor, because now they're feeling like that investor, the investors feeling like that entrepreneur does not have the capabilities to put that money to work to build a successful company. All right. So that's what I mean by increasing confidence of the investor, which is really just them believing that every investor still knows that there is a possibility of losing all the money. All right, because that happens. Even if you sold a company before for a ton of money, your second go around does not guarantee that you'll be able to build that company and do the same thing as you did the first time. So every investor in the back of their mind understands that there's still a possibility, but they want to at least feel comfortable, trust and confidence that you have the ability. And that right there helps reduce the risk for them, okay? And the other note I just wanted to bring up was the fact that there may be a couple, depending on the investor you are catering to. That's the other thing, is that think of an investor as a customer. We all in business, we always talk about we have to have these customer segments. that this target profile, this customer, that we're going to channel this customer. Let's just say it's mothers, soccer moms, right? Or it's tech gurus or whatever. Those are customer segments that we try to sell the product to. The same applies when it comes to attracting investors. Okay, there's some sophisticated investors and there are some unsophisticated investors. And what I mean by unsophisticated investors, meaning that unsophisticated investors, they're considered accredited investor, as in they have $1 million in assets, or they make $250 a year as a single person, or they make 300 grand a year as a married couple. Those are some rules according to the SEC. So meaning that they're well off, so they have the cash to invest, but they may not have the skill set or the knowledge of how to actually invest. And so with those investors, they may not be sophisticated enough to do the proper due diligence, which is also could be a risk for you as the entrepreneur, because they may have some they may be thinking, hey, let's so they give you money, be confident, but let's just say the business doesn't grow at the speed as they had hoped, and they may come back in not understanding this world. Matter of fact, I'll give you one good example. Difference between private and public: liquidity, right? Being able to get your money out. An unsophisticated person may say, okay, look, I just gave you $10,000. It's been a year now. Like, you know what? I have an emergency at home. My wife is sick. I need my 10 grand back. An unsophisticated investor will probably ask that question. And the reason why I say that, sophisticated investor will realize when you invest in private companies, you can't get your money back until a defined time, like maybe a sale or a refinance or something of that nature. You can't just put your money in, similar to a stock market, and get your money out. So you got to understand who your investor is, and what type of investments they invest in, and then you articulate, you craft your whole deck and your whole pitch to meet their personal criteria. Okay, so that's also very important to know. All right, so kind of getting started. So after you get those basic things down, understanding who your target market is in terms of investor, and then also preparing everything to help increase their confidence, by also reducing the risk. Then after that, you showcase your killer business. All right. So here's the basic outline of a pitch deck. What I did is I put the things in red. I put the items in red to kind of pinpoint some of the slides that probably are more important than the ones that are not in red. The ones that are not in red are kind of optional, where you can include it if you feel like it could add value, but you don't necessarily need it. It all depends on where you are in your business. So starting off, a basic cover slide, logo, date, a slogan in there if you have one, maybe any highlights from any awards, major publications, maybe you're mentioned in Delaware Business Time or something of that nature. Of course, your name and any basic contact info. You start off with that. Then you get into your value proposition slide, or you can call it the excuse me, can't get my words together. Elevator pitch slide. Here you're kind of casting the vision. What are you doing? And the core area that you're solving. What's that thing? And this is really all I'm thinking of as the bait hook, to kind of capture the investors' attention, so that way they can understand exactly what you do, who you do it for, and what's the benefit. Okay. Now, this particular slide, it's up front, but in a lot of cases, it may be at the end. So with this slide is the team, okay? And so the scenarios where putting your team up front is great if you have a very seasoned team. As an example, when I gave the example earlier of a person sold a business before, not saying that has to be the thing. Sometimes it can be someone that you maybe have worked in the industry, or you've been doing this business for a while, or you're just some amazing person that has the proper credentials. go ahead and put that up front. And this is a scenario where you do want to, they always, in society says you should eat some humble pie, and not really like, you should be pleasant and be really humble. But in this scenario, you do want to brag about yourself, your accomplishments related to this particular business. There was a company that we were working on to invest in, and this one gentleman, he is a scientist, but he has done, it's in the footwear space, and he's very, very smart. And he has done other deals with big shoe brands. And when he first pitched, he did not mention any of those things. That's an example where you embellish. You tell people what you have accomplished that's related, especially if it's related to this. And again, it's going back to confidence. So if you're in the footwear business and you did a lot of business with other footwear, big brands, put that in there. This is not a time to be humble. This isn't a time to tell the world how great you are. Okay. So to get some of the specifics, of course, add a photo, does not hurt. If you don't, not a biggie, but a photo does help. It makes it more of a warm slide. Like I mentioned earlier, relevant experiences, any successes, exits. If there's failures, if it's something that you can kind of spin it, where something that you learned from that scenario, like, hey, yeah, this didn't happen, but as a result of this happened. Those, because any investor, we understand things go up and down. We understand failures happen too, but we understand failures sometimes can go into other major things, right? And so, if you have something that's related that can kind of add value, by all means, share it. Leadership experience, have you managed people before? It's a subtle thing, but this is important, especially if you have employees or plan to hire employees, because you can be great at the engineering aspect, at the product itself, but you can be horrible at dealing with people. And that is just as bad. You can have the greatest product ever, but if you do not know how to handle people, it can kill the whole deal immediately. All right. Of course, education, but in my opinion, experience always trumps education. And so, and just to try to help this slide be concise, you don't have to write necessarily. Actually, for the whole presentation, don't worry about doing lengthy. Well, actually, I should step back on that. You can have maybe 2 slides, 2 PowerPoint presentations. One where you send ahead and make it readable, so for that investor. So in that scenario, you may want to have a few sentences, nothing lengthy, nothing like a paragraphs, anything like that, but just something straight to the point. So that way, if you're not physically present, the investor can read your deck and get a basic understanding of what you do. But then you also want to have the presentation slide where it is bullets. It is with bullets. And you can just speak to the points. No sentences, but you just speak to all the points. All right. So then the next slide is basically, obviously any business solves a problem or fills a market need. Here, this is what you want to hone in on. And in these next couple of slides, this is what's going to capture. These slides are very important because this is what's going to capture the investor's attention and help connect the dots of why your business exists. So again, every business solves a problem or fulfills an unmet need in the marketplace. And on this slide, you talk about what that is. And again, sometimes the startups, it can be, a company. So one company we invested in with True Access Capital, the problem that they were solving was last mile delivery in Africa. They don't have the convenience in a lot of areas to be able to have Prime just deliver something right at your doorstep. So they have to. So he discovered that problem and created a solution to kind of help fill that void. All right. I know that's a technology, and I'm not sure the audience in here, but let's just say you have a brick and mortar business. Maybe it's a restaurant that's not in the market. That that there's a demand for this particular thing. Boom, you solve that void. All right. So this is a slide where you present the existing problem that's in the marketplace And then the next slide is that you come in and start talking about how you plan to solve this problem. This particular slide can be more than, it can be 1 to 5 slides of you describing that. I put demo in here because sometimes in starters world you can actually demo a product, but again, if that's not relatable to you, that's fine. Like, but if you have a consumer product, maybe it's you're giving them a sample of how your product tastes. Okay, we do things with ShopRite with their Isles trials, and when it comes, so that's another example of where you're demoing your product by showing and allowing people to taste it. So this is where you would display that, even if let's just item. Maybe you talk about the ingredients that makes your product better than the competition. Switch to a better network real quick. All right. Okay. I should be good. You guys can still hear me okay, right?
I can hear you great.
Okay, perfect. Oops. All right, this next slide, it gets into how big the market is. And you may not need all these pieces, but it's really trying to figure out if you're solving the problem for, let's just say, I'm gonna just use something generic that everyone can relate to, is let's just say cancer. All right, and Lord willing, one day someone will discover a full cure for all that. But so that we map it out, like how many people have cancer in the U.S., and then you dive a little bit deeper. How many people may have brain cancer in this particular U.S.? How many kids, and if maybe it's a product for kids, how many kids that may have brain cancer in the U.S.? And you start just digging deeper, and what you're trying to figure out is who's your target market, how many of that target segment is out there that you can attract. So if you're looking for a soccer mom within her 40s that have kids in their that play sports in their that are in their they're about 10 to 13, basically how many of those mothers are out there in the US or this market you serve? Because if maybe you're brick and mortar, you're not going all the way out to Mexico, Pennsylvania, but maybe it's in Newark, Delaware. Like how many of those soccer moms or kids that fit that are in that particular region? And that kind of gives you the scope of how big your market can potentially be within that scope. Oops. This slide is the basic competition slide. I'm going to give you some examples of some diagrams you can kind of use to kind of help this, or you can just basically say who they are. Because after you identify the problem, your solution, you identified maybe how big the market is, and which is basically how big the market is telling how much revenue you could potentially yield by serving that particular market. Then you also got to address the competition. And there are indirect and there are direct competitors. Direct competitors, we all know, is people are doing exactly what you're doing. Indirect competitors, they may not be doing exactly what you're doing, but they are taking money away, right? If you're opening up a soul food restaurant, okay, Chipotle could be an indirect competitor. Wawa could be an indirect competitor, right? Because the reality is that that person did not choose soul food that evening for dinner. They choose a Wawa hoagie. Anytime someone takes money away from you, that's competition. Okay. So that has to be articulated. So that way the investor knows, okay, your thing may be the greatest thing in the world, but who else is doing it? Okay. Who else is doing it? But now, granted, you may be doing it better, which is perfectly fine. but we want to know who else is doing it. So it gives us a realization of realization of how much market share can we actually get in this particular space. These two things are not.
Pedro, can I just
Yes.
jump in? I think you're touching on a lot of like really important pieces, not only just sharing your value, making sure that people are clearly articulating the experience they're coming in with and their idea, but this idea of like how to create that market share, how to identify your competitors properly, and also identify like, you know, as you're thinking about projected revenue. I think I want to make sure that if there's any questions at this point, because these are kind of big topics. If anyone has any questions during these slides, please feel free to raise your hand and or throw your questions into the Q&A or chat, and we'll make sure to jump on them while it's kind of still fresh in our minds.
Good point. Good point. And these are just some diagrams that you can put your competition in, and where you articulate it. Maybe a couple unique value propositions of maybe you're at a better price, cheaper price, or you produce more value, you have a couple of different features, et cetera, et cetera. You can do like you can do a feature list, your company, here's all your competition. You guys probably seen things like this before, but you know, you can put it in and list it out in a way that articulates how you are better than your competition. If you have a consumer product, maybe yours tastes better or performs better. It saves X amount percentage. You know, all those little things need to be articulated, so that way that investor knows how much better you are compared to the competition. Also, one good thing too, didn't think of until I just saw the slide, is, you know, for example, a competition, patents, okay? If you have any patents that are directly tied towards your value proposition, your core product, that is definitely something that needs to be conveyed, all right? Any barrier to entry, you know, whether it's development, a certain amount of money. If you have some key relationships, that gives you, I mentioned earlier, the one gentleman that has a lot of relationships with a lot of big sportswear brands, you know, that is helpful, because let's just say for me, if I'm trying to get into the sports business, it's going to take a lot longer for me to get those contacts compared to what he has. He already has it. They're just an email or phone call away. Or for me, I might have to invest in a lot of networking, relationship building, et cetera, which will obviously require a lot of time. So all those little things help in the process of securing your competitive advantage. The next slide will be the business model, which is basically how do you make money? You know, so here you want to talk about, and this
Pedro, sorry to jump in. We do have a question. Is there one of the questions is, how are there sources or references that add credibility to the market data provided? Are there sources or references to stay away from?
Well, I'll say sources for market data, just to make it easy for your life. If just reference a lot of times, a lot of newspapers, or not news, or just websites, you know, I would say industry related sites that have statistics, have market trends, have data. You can source those. In terms of what to stay away from, I'm not sure, unless you know that source. If you don't have confidence in that source, don't use it, okay? But if it's a, so for example, like I mentioned, FundingFuel does with franchises, I can put in statistics from Franchise Times, okay? That is a credible news publication that focuses on franchises. Or if you have data from particular studies, that's good information. Or if you have done research yourself, okay, that helped. That is very helpful. Meaning that you went out, you talked to, you interviewed, and you collected a lot of information to help you move forward with this business endeavor. So that all those things are good pieces to kind of help you collect data. I only say stuff to stay away from, things that you personally feel is not necessarily legit. Or if you found a site that you looked at like you never heard of the site before, maybe stay away from that type of site. So find something that's related related to your particular industry and use the market data from that particular site and just source that, and that should suffice. So I hope that answers your question. Oops. Okay. All right. So in the business model section, this is just basically how do you make money. You start off with the core. What is your core product? What is your main thing that you make money? And get into how does it happen? Is it based off of a transaction fee? So think of a realtor. They only make money when a house is sold. Is it a monthly subscription? Or is it, I'm just use the general term of an asset sale, meaning that you have an asset, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's a consumer product, and someone buys it. Then you get into the frequency of that, okay? Because that helps determine how often someone will be buying that particular product. So let's just say deodorant. We all know probably after 30 days you'll be buying some more deodorant. But if it's trying to think of another product that we may not buy every so often. Here's one, because this just happened to me personally. We didn't do it, but I forget what you call the technical term of if you have a driveway and you want to get that sealant on that may only happen, every couple of years, so that's not something that would happen frequently. So in that scenario, if you're a person where someone buys from you every blue moon, you're not going to really have that many reoccurring customers. So you have to constantly go out and shop for new clientele to keep that money coming into the door. However, if you have a product like some deodorant, there's a good chance you have a higher percentage of reoccurring customers that will be coming back to you, versus you always have to going out finding new customers. Okay. So all those things are important. And again, depending on your business too, the cash collection side, how are you invoicing? Now, this is probably more for B2B businesses. How are you collecting this money? Because the realization is, depending on who your clientele is, you may not see that cash for almost 60, 90 days. So if that's the case, what are you doing in the meantime to cover expenses? All right. So those are some hard questions that got to be answered, because even though you can have a contract worth, $1 million, right? And you perform the contract, but you won't see that $1 million until like 90 days down the road, right? So what is your process of collecting that, or your negotiation of doing those contracts to maybe at least get a little bit of that money up front to help cover expenses? Next slide is the marketing approach. These are just some all examples of how you plan to target folks. First, I actually would like to say, I learned this from a gentleman too a while ago, that identifying who your customer is and maybe even articulating who it is not, because that's also really important. Channels where they are. Excuse me. So if you're trying to reach a particular audience, where do they hang out? So that way you know where to spend your actual money. How much does it cost to acquire each of those clients? And some of this data you may not know, depending on which stage you are in your business. You may not know all these things, and that's okay, because some of these things you will learn over in time. But if you do know it, you definitely want to articulate this as well. If you, for example, like lifetime value of a customer, you may not know that until a little bit. You have to have a couple of years under your belt of some traction to kind of help you project that number. conversion rate, the sales cycle for the client. If you're working with any government, any governments that are government agencies, that sales cycle maybe take some time. Big universities, that sales cycle is going to take some time. So even if you don't have all these things figured out, that's okay. But you do at least want to have this understanding. So using this, how long is the sales cycle? Going back to my point of increasing investors' confidence, a sophisticated investor would know big corporations have a longer sales cycle. But if you come in there and saying, yeah, I got this contract from University of Delaware and it's going to make us so much money, but you're not sure how long it's really going to take, you may have just shot yourself in the foot, because then now the investor may be thinking, well, this guy never has done this before. He does not have realistic expectations of how long it's going to take from getting the contract signed, to delivering, and to actually getting paid. Right, that may take several months before that happens. All right, and so you want to at least be able to have that good understanding and be able to articulate that to any investor. Projections. I'm trying to figure out how much we need slides. Okay, almost done. Projections here. Now, I do have an opinion about projections. The earlier you are, the harder this is going to be to be able to articulate. But it does help for an investor kind of get an idea of what you're thinking, at least. But also a sophisticated investor will realize that they cannot heavily rely on projections, because there's a good chance that most companies rarely ever hit these numbers. And then sometimes the ones that do, they sometimes actually go past the actual numbers. And so, but it's a good exercise to do. So the best rule of thumb is to probably project like 3 years ahead. Now on the PowerPoint presentation, you don't really want to just copy and put the whole image of your Excel spreadsheet in the slide, because it's not going to be a great user experience, because it's going to make everything so small, and the investor's going to have to like almost squint just to read everything. But best way to really do it is probably just to map out high level of maybe number of users or clientele, high level gross revenue, your cost of goods sold, total operating expenses, and then your net income. Okay, and that should suffice. Now I would say you definitely want to have those projections saved somewhere, so that way, if the investor wants to follow up to dig deeper, you can email him or her that copy of where that information, what you have in this summary of financial projections, so that way they can see it in detail. But you do want to be able, so in this presentation, you don't want to put a lot in there, just really high level information. Now, if you do have some historical, depending on which stage you're at, definitely include that year 1, year 2 revenue, because it helps with the trajectory. If year 2, let's just say year 1 you first launched at 100 grand, year 2 you did 150, so now you're projecting for year 3 to do 300 or something like that. Okay, so it does help if you have some historical data to help with that. So I hope that helps. Because sometimes folks, they just literally take a screenshot of the Excel spreadsheet and just dump it in there, and that actually does more harm than good. So on the closing slide, just want to make sure. Oops. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. So the last important slide, right? You're doing all this for a reason. The last slide is the capital raise. How much? What is your basic ask? And also too, so I'm gonna throw this in there. Sometimes the ask may not always be money, or it could be both. It could be also introductions, because I'll also give you this tip. If you can, the perfect investor is an investor that doesn't just give money. The perfect investor is an investor that gives you money, insight, and connections. That's the perfect investor. So don't just, if you can, don't just take money from any and everybody. Take money from people that can also add value where is necessary. So put the money how much you want. What do you plan to use it for? The total round size. You know, some of these other things too. Monthly burn rate. This is sometimes more so for, you know, startups, but if you're in that phase, that pertains to you. If not, you can ignore some of these things. However, some of the things you don't want to ignore though, monthly burn rate, that is something that any startup, monthly burn rate is basically how much expenses are you paying every month. That gives you an idea. So if I give you $120,000, in theory that in theory, and it's supposed to last you a whole year. So in theory, you're going to spend about $10,000 a month. If your monthly burn rate is $10,000 a month, if you don't not bringing any more money in at all, by end of 12 months, you'll basically be out of money. Okay. And so getting into use of proceeds, you know, what are you planning to use it for? Build out some technology, like this is for tech startup, but in your case, maybe it's distribution, maybe it's creating a product, expanding the team, getting into another market, et cetera, et cetera. So it could be a lot of different reasons. That's where you want to put the use of proceeds in there. Okay. And I want to just close the slide, basically just ending it, your logo, any questions, and your basic contact information. All right. I see these are just some optional slides. Obviously, just throw these in if you feel it's relevant, where maybe your exit strategy. So if you have a product and the investor you're pitching may have connections to big tier companies and you feel is a good complement. So you may talk about how we plan to sell this company in X amount of years. We feel like you'll be a good investor into this company because you can help us achieve certain milestones to be an attractive acquisition for parent company X, whatever that could be. My two screens are not consistent. Sorry. These are just some little tidbits. Slides can be they used to say 10 slides, but really it can be however many slides, as long as you're probably within, if you're having a one-on-one session, that can probably be like an hour. But with you pitching, probably is going to be about 10 minutes or so with you actually presenting. Try to make sure your slides are clean, precise, straight to the point, have some good takeaways, make sure you check for typos. These are just small little things just to make sure that your business not being overlooked for some small little typos. Another slide, if you have these things, definitely put this in there. Traction, maybe your sales, big clients, any mentions in major articles, any awards that you've been a part of, if you've been a part of a particular accelerator, all those little things help. So definitely put those, again, going back to my original slide earlier, embellish, talk about, brag, you know, show them what you have accomplished thus far. All right, that is all I have. And I think I made it on that 12-hour session.
Yep, you did it.
So awesome. Any questions?